to the Manuscript podcast, the story of us as told by Taylor Swift. Join us for each episode as we tell a different person's life story through exploring the impact that Taylor Swift has had on their journey, whether she's brought them love, hate, or indifference. If you're already a huge podcast listener, just imagine NPR's This American Life meets The Ringer's every single album, Taylor Swift. This is the Manuscript podcast, and I am your host, Caitlin Sayers. So, I've been wanting to start this podcast for a while and really been thinking about this idea. And the whole idea that got me started on wanting to make this podcast was that I believe that I can link a core memory from my life to at least one song on every Taylor Swift album. And as I was going through this last year with the Eras tour and everything that's been going on, talking to more Swifties, making new friends, and meeting a bunch of people, I realized that I'm really not the only person that feels that way. But the crazy thing is that when you go around and you talk to a bunch of different Swifties, we can all talk about the same song, but I find that everybody takes something different away from it. The experiences that you've had in your life and the things that you've gone through really dictate the experience that you have when listening to Taylor Swift's music. And then when the song The Manuscript came out, I was like, oh my gosh, this song gives a premise to this idea that I've been talking about, which is the fact that we can tell our stories, our personal life stories of us as Swifties through Taylor's music and through the way that her music affects us. She's been telling us all the way through the Eras tour that even though she wrote these songs about her life, she hopes that now we will take them, and when we think about them, we'll remember the memories that we've made together and the memories that we've made in our life with Taylor's music. And so I wanted to start this podcast, the Manuscript podcast, to take the manuscript that Taylor Swift has given us and turn it into the books of our life stories as Swifties. Take the story and tell our stories through the impact that Taylor has had on us and tie together all of those invisible strings that she's laid out. So today I want to start our podcast by sharing with you my personal Swiftie journey through the core memories that I have made in each era, starting from debut and to get today going all the way through Evermore. And then in celebration of Tortured Poets Department being a double album drop, this podcast is also going to have a double pilot. And so today we're just going to cover those first 9 eras and my core memories throughout my life. I'm going to tell my Swiftie journey. And then in our double pilot, in our second episode, we are going to dive into just the last 18 months. We're going to talk about Midnights going into the Eras tour and up to Tortured Poets Department, and really how the last year has accelerated and supercharged the Swiftie fandom and brought in a whole bunch of new people to the fold. So our second episode will just be about this past year and how the fandom has reached a whole new level in that time, and honestly how my Swiftie journey personally has become supercharged just over the last year. Since this show includes deep discussions of personal stories, there may be triggers in some episodes. This episode contains a trigger warning for sexual assault, domestic violence, and depression. We won't be diving deeply into any of these topics, but I wanted to provide a warning at the top for anyone who may have concerns. Please enjoy the episode. So, to start the story of my Swiftie journey, we are going to have to go way, way back, almost 20 years ago to 2006, when Taylor released her very first album. I was 10 years old at the time. Oh my gosh, I feel like I was such a baby. But honestly, at the same time, when I think back on it, I can't believe that I was 10 years old already before Taylor released her first album, because I feel like I've had her around my entire life. I really can't remember a time in my life when I wasn't singing a Taylor Swift song. And my first core memory, one of my oldest memories actually in my whole life, is when I went on a car trip with my dad the very first time that we visited California. My family is originally from California a couple of generations back, but my grandparents moved out to Colorado, and that's where my dad raised me. But I have always loved California, and it started out originally with this trip that my dad took me on. We drove across the country in my dad's Mustang convertible to go visit California and meet my California family for the first time. And I remember on that trip in the car was the first time that I heard our song on the radio. And this is just such a strong core memory for me, being in the car with my dad, hearing that song on the radio for the first time. Like literally every time I hear our song now, I immediately am back in that convertible with my wind in my hair, driving through Arizona. And ever since then, I just feel like that song has been like a part of my life. I remember growing up listening to the lyrics of our song and thinking, this is the type of relationship that I want to have. This is the definition of love for me. And I think for me as a kid, that song was the first time that true love, or what I idealized as potential true love, was really put into words for me. And that was just such an incredible experience. And it still sticks with me to this day. And I am married. I am in true love. And every time I hear this song, it definitely makes me think of my husband. But later on that year, my grandmother gave me a copy of the debut CD for Christmas. So that was in the winter of 2006. And I swear I spun that CD every single day. I had like a boombox in my bedroom that I used to listen on. And I also used to have a Discman. And I would take my Discman and my little purple sparkly headphones, and I'd go in my grandma's backyard, and I would dance around that album for hours and hours and hours every single day. And I just feel like that's part of the foundation of my love for music, and definitely for Taylor Swift. And it also started building the narrative of what I viewed as true love in my life. So it was during Fearless era that I feel like I really started to become a big fan of Taylor Swift. It was more than just listening to her music in my room and memorizing all of the lyrics. When Fearless came out is the first time that I really feel like Taylor Swift and her music started to have an impact on my life outside of just her lyrics. And that started really, I think, the summer after Fearless first came out, which the spring before that, I went through something really hard. I was about 11 going on 12 during this time. And it was during that winter that I experienced my first trauma in life. Unfortunately, I was sexually assaulted as a young girl by someone who I really trusted, someone who was really close to me. And so I was questioning love for the first time in my life. I was trying to understand again what love meant and how to trust people. And I was really looking for examples of what true love should be and could be. And Fearless was such a great album for that for me, because it gives these really fun, fantastical examples of true love, which are great for a young girl who is looking to reestablish sort of her hope and her understanding in love. But it also talks about familial love on albums like, or songs like The Best Day. And I feel like that during that time, I really needed something to latch onto, and I started to hyperfixate a lot just to get out of my head and to find some solace away from dealing with the trauma that I was dealing with. And part of that came in the form of really deeply engaging with Taylor's music, and especially the song Love Story. I was obsessed with that song as a little girl. I have always been super into princesses and corsets, and so the aesthetic of that whole music video just really like made me light up as a kid. And then at the time, I also, as a coping mechanism, became super fixated on the Twilight series. I was really, really into the Twilight books. I was listening to the audiobooks, reading them nonstop, just on a loop. I actually read Eclipse so many times that the front cover fell off of my hardcover copy of Eclipse, and I actually think the back cover fell off too. I was reading them constantly, and so for me, Twilight and Taylor Swift ended up sort of like going hand in hand and really helping me get through that time. And I actually remember one of the things that I did as a kid is I wrote a cover of Love Story, but it was a fan fiction cover that was about Edward and Bella instead. So it was like a Twilight fan fiction cover of Love Story. And I just have such this vivid memory of that. Like, I can literally picture myself right now sitting at my grandmother's computer in her house, typing that out after watching the Love Story music video on MTV and just being so obsessed. And that is definitely one of my core memories from that album, is just how Twilight and the Fearless album went hand in hand for me and really helped me overcome a time of trauma, and a time when I was questioning and trying to rediscover myself and re-understand love and intimacy in a new way. And Fearless helped me continue to grow even after that year. The following summer, when I was 12 going on 13, I was going to summer camp, and I really wanted to do the camp counselors in training program. And I sort of got in on a technicality because you're supposed to be 13 years old in order to be a counselor in training. But I was 12 and I was turning 13 like a couple of days into the camp session. And they let me join the session anyway. And it just ended up being sort of a weird situation for me because I was by far the youngest person in the program. The next youngest person after me was a boy who was 13 going on 14. So he, even though he was 13, he was still almost like 2 years older than me. And all of the other girls in the program were like 15, 16, 17. They were all quite a bit older than me. But for me as a young woman, I was always someone who was very ahead of my age, ahead of my years, which of course is something I relate to Taylor on as well. She talks about it a lot, on Tortured Poets. She says, sometimes when you grow up precocious, you don't grow up at all. And I feel like that's sort of what I was too. I was a very precocious child. I always wanted to be older than I was. And now that I'm a grown up, I'm like, what the hell was I doing? But back then, like, I really wanted to fit in with these older girls. And I really wanted to be grown up and be a leader, and that's why I was in this camp counselor program. And I just have this vivid memory of I was feeling so disconnected and so out of place because I was so much younger than the rest of the girls in the camp. And one night we were all sitting around in the cabin at the end of the night, and one of these girls pulled out a boombox, or I think it wasn't, this was a little past boombox. She had an iPod Nano. She had an iPod Nano, and she had one of those little tiny speakers that you can plug into your iPod into. She had one of those, and they put on Fearless, the song Fearless, and all the girls started singing it, and I knew it too. I knew that song, and so I got up and I was dancing around the room and singing at the top of my lungs with all of these other girls who were older than me, but in that moment it didn't matter. We were all on the same page. We were all enjoying the same thing, and it was just such a pure moment of girlhood that it has always stuck with me, that in that moment Taylor took away all those boundaries and made that situation sort of ageless. It didn't matter that I was younger. It didn't matter that they were older. We all were enjoying Taylor together, and it made me feel included. And actually from that night forward going on, a couple of the older girls actually sort of took me under their wing, and we were able to relate on Taylor Swift, and then they started teaching me more things about being a teenager and about being a young woman, and I got to learn a lot Evermore. And it really all started with this one moment that was given to me by Fearless by Taylor Swift. And so I'm really grateful for the way that that album sort of helped me grow up, and the way that it helped me feel grown up when I needed to also as well. And so I feel like that was a time in my life when I was learning a lot about emotions, and Taylor was learning a lot about emotions too. And I'm just really grateful that I had her album during that time to help me get through those experiences. So, going into the Speak Now era was a little bit different for me. I know that I must have been introduced to it early on when it came out, because I have an original Speak Now CD. I found it when I was unpacking, and I know that I believe I was given it for my birthday the year after it came out. But I don't remember being as super attached necessarily to the Speak Now album when it first came out. At the time, I was really into Demi Lovato, Ellie Goulding, Katy Perry. I've always been a big One Republic girl. I've always been a huge Panic at the Disco girl. When Brendan Urie and Taylor Swift collaborated, that was like, I was so freaking excited. That was a big, big deal for me. And during that time in high school, I was really into a lot of other artists, and Taylor sort of slipped under my radar for a little bit. But there was one song from Speak Now that was a really big deal to me all along, all the way through high school. And honestly, I don't think I would have survived high school without this song. And that song was Mean. Mean is a song that has always sort of helped me get out of a slump and put myself back on top, and is probably sort of the foundation for the way that I feel about a lot of things in my life. I've always sort of felt like if I didn't get an opportunity, then that just meant that I had to show that person that they were wrong, that they had missed out on something. And this song has always sort of supported my self-esteem in doing that, and in sort of, saying, when people see less than your best, it's just them being mean. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not, but it can really help you get through a lot of situations. But for me, it also touched me in another really personal place, which is that growing up, my mom and my dad got divorced really young, and so I grew up living with a single father. But I would go over and visit my mom a lot. My mom got remarried to a man who was an alcoholic. He was abusive physically and verbally, not towards me, but towards my mom and my brother. And the only reason he never really touched me is because he knew that my dad would step in if anything happened. My dad is a total Scott Swift. Absolutely. If anything had ever happened to me, he would have gone total tiger mode. But I did grow up going over to my mom's house and seeing my stepdad be abusive towards my mom and towards my older brother. And I spent a lot of my younger life trying to convince my brother to call the cops, trying to convince my mom to leave. And neither of them would. And when I heard Mean for the first time, the very first thing that I ever thought of was my stepdad. And I blamed him, and I still blame him a lot for causing detriment to my relationship with my mom and with my older brother. And having this song as something to turn towards when I was angry with him and angry with the situation that I was in for being cut off from my family, really helped me get through some really hard times. I have always used this song as something to lift me up. And my favorite line in this song is where she says, someday I'll be living in a big old city and all you'll ever be is mean. And that's really the line that I've always clung on to. That's what I always thought about my stepdad. And then as I moved into high school, I am an actress, I'm a performer, and I have been ever since I was a little girl. And when I got into high school, I started auditioning for acting schools, acting colleges. I was auditioning for all of my school plays and a ton of different productions. But my high school theater director who ran all of the theater programs, she liked to pick favorites. And she, from the freshman class, would pick a handful of kids that she would basically foster through all 4 years. And if you were not picked to be one of her favorites from day one, then you were going to have the hardest time all 4 years trying to score a part at all. And so when I started trying to get into these shows and I was auditioning all the time and I was getting understudies or I was getting small parts or I wasn't getting cast at all, again, Mean was the song that really came back to me because I was dealing with this director who was actually pretty mean and who was playing favorites, would put people down to make them think that they weren't good enough to cover up the fact that she was playing favorites. And every time I would walk up to that audition sheet and I wouldn't see my name on it, I would just think that same line, someday I'm going to be living in a big old city and all you're ever going to be is Mean. And now I am. I moved to California. I am pursuing my career as an actor, and I am so happy with my life. And I have spoken to other theater kids who have graduated from my high school in the years since, and all that woman has ever been is Mean. So I'm happy with where I am now and how far I've come. And even though I didn't have a really strong attachment to Speak Now the first time around, that song has always been a core memory for me. It helped me get through my abusive childhood, and it helped me get through and still helps me get through the pain of rejection every single time. So that's probably the biggest part of Speak Now for me. So, funnily enough, when Red originally came out as an album, I actually sort of missed the era altogether. This was still when I was in my Katy Perry phase in high school, and there's actually a very specific reason that I missed the Red era. And that's because one of the lead singles for the Red album was We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together. And this is actually kind of a funny story. So when I first heard the song We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, I hated it. I absolutely despised that song. And this was also around the same time when Miley Cyrus was leaving behind her Hannah Montana persona. I was a huge Hannah Montana fan, but Miley Cyrus had moved away from Disney. She was starting to do her edgier stuff, and I wasn't really a fan of it, and I wasn't really a fan of the way that she was using her voice in the newer, raspier way. It just wasn't my thing. And so I heard the song We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together when it first came out, and I was convinced that it was a Miley Cyrus song. Like, I thought that song was by Miley Cyrus, and I thought it was horrible. I thought it was the worst song ever. And for 2 whole years, I thought that song was a Miley Cyrus song. And somewhere in the world, I must have known that new Taylor Swift music was coming out because, like, I'd heard I Knew You Were Trouble, and I enjoyed that song. And I'd heard 22, and I liked that song because 2 is my lucky number. So when she came out with 22, like, that song was a big deal for me. I really, really loved that song. But I guess I just thought they were singles, and I never caught on with the fact that they were part of a larger album. But I, for years, thought that We Were Never Getting Back Together was a Miley Cyrus song until one day I was walking through JCPenney's with my mom, and this song came on over the radio. And I told my mom, I'm like, oh my God, I hate this Miley Cyrus song so much, but the chorus, every time I hear it, it sounds so much like Taylor Swift. It's so weird. And my mom turned to me and looked me in the eyes, and she's like, "Hun, this is Taylor Swift." And I lost it. I was so confused but I was like, I guess my brain knew. This sounds like Taylor Swift, but I did not want to admit to myself that it was a Taylor Swift song because at the time I hated the song so much. And it's grown on me. It's a bop. I can definitely bop out to it now, but it is also still the song that I peed during the Eras tour. So, um, so during that time, I sort of missed the Red era. I wasn't really involved in it, but Red became relevant for me later. Really, during this time, um, is when I was starting to identify and find my own identity, and I was on the cusp of adulthood. I was about to graduate high school. I went to film school in New York in between my junior and senior years of high school, which was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And unfortunately, that was the year before 1989, the album came out. But when the album came out and I heard Welcome to New York for the first time, like every time I hear that song, even now, it immediately takes me back to that trip and to that little point in time where I was living for the summer in New York City going to film school. And every time I hear that song, every time I sing that song, it's like a little video reel plays in my head of my time living in New York. And I can immediately understand why Taylor Swift fell in love with the city. And it was just such a really cool experience to hear her talk about that and to really talk about coming of age for the first time, more so than she did on her earlier albums, and this coming of age experience that she had with moving to New York, because for me, it literally mirrored my own experience, because less than a year before that album came out, I had gone to New York and had a coming of age experience of my own. And so at that time, I felt really close to Taylor because I felt like we're on the same path. We're going to the same cities looking for fulfillment, and her career was reaching its peak, and I was about to graduate high school. I was just right around the age that Taylor was when she started her career. And I really was looking to her as a role model for everything that I had the potential to do in my life. And 1989 for me sort of became the soundtrack for all of that potential going forward into my adulthood. And, it was a really hard time for me also. I was getting my first job. I was trying to understand myself more. I got into a bit of a hard time with my dad and my stepmom, and I decided to move out of my parents' house and move in with my birth mom, who was sort of separated from her abusive husband at that point. But I decided to go live with her for a year, and it was during that time that the 1989 album dropped. And my core memory from this period is I just have this such a vivid memory of the night that the 1989 album dropped. Me and my mom, this was back when they still did midnight releases in the stores, before, all the trampling and the madhouse craziness and the shootings made it so that we couldn't do that anymore. So this is back when they used to actually still do midnight releases at the stores. And I remember me and my mom driving to Target at midnight and waiting outside for them to unlock the doors so that we could go in and buy 1989. And we went inside and we bought the album. We came back out to the car, and we were like, well, we can't go home and listen to it because my stepdad, who still lived in the house, worked really early in the morning. He worked at like 4 in the morning. And so we couldn't go home and blast the album on the speakers. So we just sat in the parking lot at Target and we put the CD in my mom's car CD player and blasted 1989, the first listen ever, in my mom's car stereo in the parking lot of Target right after buying it. And we had the most amazing time. Like, that experience of just sitting in a dark car with my mom hearing 1989 for the first time will always probably be one of my most incredible girlhood experiences. And because, like I said, my stepdad and the situation in my mom's house had really damaged my relationship with my mom and caused us to really be split for many, many years. Um, this night, the night that 1989 came out and we listened to it in the car together, is really one of the biggest healing moments for me between me and my mom. I honestly feel like this night is the band-aid that started me and my mom being able to build a relationship together again. And without that moment, I don't know if my mom and I would be as close as we are today. But today, my mom and I have a really, really close relationship, and Taylor is a really core part of that. We always relate on Taylor now. She brings us together, and I would say that to this day, I owe my relationship with my mom to Taylor Swift. It was also during this time that I was starting to have my first romantic relationship. I had a boyfriend in my senior year of high school, and that was a super awesome experience. He was a really great guy, and we ended up having to break up for mental health reasons on his part, but I still loved him very much. We had an incredible relationship in high school, but I also still sort of felt like something was missing. And I also felt like, because I was such a career-focused person, that I was a burden to anybody who chose to have a relationship with me, because I would never be able to put my partner first. In my life, my career always comes first, and anybody who I date will always be second. And I was really struggling at the time with, trying to find out if I could be a person in a relationship, and have that still be true, or if that wasn't fair to someone who I was dating. And through some sort of odd avenues, that led me to learn more about polyamory, which, if you've heard of polygamy, it is not the same thing as polyamory. So polygamy is when one man marries multiple women, usually for religious reasons. But polyamory is a form of what's called ethical non-monogamy. And that is when two people in a committed relationship agree to have open communication and engage in relationships, not sex, not casual hookups, relationships with more than one individual, not just their primary partner. And when I learned about that, it felt like something that made a lot of sense to me, because I was like, I am a career-focused girl, and I have a lot to give in a relationship, and I have a lot of love, but also when I have to, turn off that so that I can focus on just myself and just my career, I don't want my partners to be abandoned or feel alone. And also at this time, I was starting to engage more with the LGBTQ community, starting to learn more about my sexuality, and I was starting to realize that I'm bisexual. And also, polyamory sort of gave me an avenue to realize that I didn't have to choose necessarily between guys and girls, because I find fulfilling things about relationships with both men and women. And by being polyamorous, then I could also be fully true to myself in being bisexual. And so it was during this time that 1989 came out that I was learning about all these different things, starting to understand these things, and starting to realize that they were a core part of myself and my identity, being a bisexual person and a polyamorous person. And in 1989, the song New Romantics felt like something I could really identify to. I felt like it sort of was a song that gave me permission to have romance in a non-traditional way, and that it sort of really was a power anthem for people who aren't in traditional relationships, or who don't date the people, or don't date in the way that other people expect them to or want them to. And so for me, New Romantics just became this anthem that told me that it's okay. And of course, it was the first time Taylor was singing, boys and boys and girls and girls. And she was reaffirming for me that, it's okay to be bisexual and to want those things. And there are places in the world where you can go and have those things freely, and people don't ask questions. And so for me, New Romantics really opened the door for me to accept all of these parts of myself that I was discovering and really be proud of them. And I felt like Taylor was learning new things about herself as well. And once again, we were growing together. So it was going into this new era of adulthood that the Red era really came back around for me, which it's funny because I actually ended up starting to identify with Red as an album when I was close to the same age that Taylor was when she wrote the Red album. But I think that the core similarity for me that happened is that this was the first time that I had a serious relationship with an older guy. I was 19 years old and I started dating a guy who was 8 years older than me. And at first, it was a super fun, super edgy relationship. Like, everything was going great. We had a lot of fun together. I felt like he treated me like an adult. A lot of those things that you experience the first time you get to have sort of a really serious relationship with someone who isn't, also a kid. But with time, I would definitely come to understand the same things that Taylor had experienced with Jake Gyllenhaal. We were dating for a long time, and then we used to go to these parties together every month, and he would come with me, and we would have a great time. And then slowly he stopped wanting to go to the parties with me, and then he stopped wanting me to go. But, he would make me less and less and less of a priority. Like, he didn't want me to go out and do these other things to have fun, but then he didn't necessarily want to spend time with me either, or wasn't prioritizing the time that we had together. And it was just becoming really hard for me because it was the first time that I'd had a relationship change from a guy who acted like I was the most exciting thing around to really putting me on the back burner. And I still loved him and cared about him, and we still had this really strong connection. But I just didn't understand why I felt like he was treating me like a little kid and why he wasn't treating me like a priority. And this was just shortly after my mom had revealed to me that We Are Never Getting Back Together was a Taylor song, and it was then that she told me that there was an entire new Taylor Swift album out that I'd never actually even listened to. And so I'd heard some songs off of Red, but I hadn't listened to the whole thing. And so I pulled it out during this time and started listening to it. And one of the crazy things is while this guy was at work, I would clean his whole apartment. Like, on a weekly basis, I would clean his entire apartment. And I just remember I got into this cycle where I would be cleaning his kitchen and freaking sobbing listening to Red. I would be listening to The Moment I Knew and All Too Well while cleaning his house, and I would just sob. Like, I think because listening to Taylor sing those songs made me realize that that's what I was feeling. It gave me words to the things that I was experiencing and feeling for the first time, and I was like, holy shit, this is the way this guy is treating me. And it sort of, through Taylor, helped me come to a realization that would eventually help me end that relationship. And also at this time, the last time from Speak Now also came back around for me. I was listening to that song a lot. The Last Time and All Too Well just would echo around in my head until I finally realized that this guy was not gonna be any good for me. He wasn't gonna put me first. He wasn't gonna let me be jeweled. And eventually it was listening to Red, and especially the song The Moment I Knew, that helped me make the decision to leave that situation. And the moment I knew for me was when I was walking into work one day and he called me to pick a fight. Like, I don't remember what it was about, but he called me to argue when he knew that I was walking into work. And he had done this several times over like the last week. And I was finally like, you know what? I can't keep doing this. I can't keep walking into work at the beginning of my shift and having my entire headspace thrown out of whack over some guy who isn't putting me first. And so that's when I really was like, you know what, we have to listen to Taylor. Like, this is the moment I know that it's over. And I called him back and I broke up with him right there. And I really do think that it was the Red album and the wisdom that Taylor had learned through her relationship with Jake Gyllenhaal that allowed me to recognize that lesson as early as I did and get out of that relationship before I gave a lot more of myself to it. And then from there, there was sort of a very quick turnaround in my life. So I broke up with that boyfriend, and then I went and stayed at a friend's house for like 3 days because I didn't want to go home because I didn't want to admit to my parents that we had broken up. Like, they'd always said he was bad news. Like, I knew you were trouble. Yeah, I get it. And so I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to admit that I'd broken up with my boyfriend. But I ended up going through this sort of weird whirlwind 1989 Red crossover era. I spent 3 days staying with a friend of mine, and then another friend of mine invited me to come out to karaoke with her and her husband and some other friends. And when we went out to karaoke, I ended up running into this guy who I'd met at parties before. We talked a couple of times, but we just didn't know each other very well. And then my friend that invited us out sort of pulled me aside at one point and was like, did you know, like, DJ has a huge crush on you? Like, he's really into you. And I never would have guessed this. Like, I was totally surprised. And I was like, what? No. But I'd had a couple drinks in me, and later that night I was coming to like sit down in the group, and my friend tripped me, straight up put her foot out and tripped me, and then sort of like grabbed my arm and swung me so that I fell into this guy's lap. And in that moment, our eyes met, and I swear to God, the song Begin Again started playing in my head. I looked into his eyes, and the energy and the chemistry between us was just so incredible. And then we kissed, and it was just electric. And we ended up talking for the rest of the night and going home together that night. And then we went on a date the next day and the day after that. And it just was so insane. It had only been 3 days since I had broken up with my previous boyfriend, but all of a sudden there was this Prince Charming showing me that, you know, everything this other guy had put me through, you know, wasn't the standard. It wasn't how it had to be. And so for me, that was my real begin again moment. For me, it began again on a Saturday in a dive bar over karaoke. But little did I know that that would be like the moment that would change the rest of my life. He turned out to be the most amazing man ever, and he really, really cared about me. And I just remember after he left the house, like, we're only 2 weeks into dating, and he would leave, and I would turn on You're in Love and how you get the girl, and I would listen to them on a loop because they made me think of him and made me feel so incredible. And we dated for about 2 weeks. We were seeing each other all the time, and then I got really, really sick. I have really severe asthma, and during the winter months, sometimes I'll get really bad, like bronchitis or strep throat infections. And so about 2 weeks into us dating, I got really, really, really sick. and I was on an oxygen machine. I was really struggling and having a hard time. I could barely leave my house because I couldn't breathe. And one night I was just laying on the couch texting DJ, and I was having a really hard time. And he texted me and asked me, he's like, do you need me to come get you and take you to the hospital? Because my mom was at work. And I was like, you live all the way on the other side of town. There's no way that I am going to ask you to come down here and pick me up and take me to the hospital. Like, you would literally have to drive across town twice to do that. Like, I'm not going to ask you to do that. And he texted me back and said, I have been sitting in a parking lot at the gas station on the corner by your house for 3 hours just in case you needed me to take you to the hospital. I never asked him to do that. He certainly didn't have to do that. Like, he had family at home, his teenage daughter and his sister that he lived with that he could have been with, but he chose to spend his night waiting around the corner just in case I needed him. He didn't tell me, when he showed up, because he didn't want credit. He didn't insist on coming and sitting with me because he knew that I didn't feel well and I wanted to be alone. But he was there anyway. And that was something that my first boyfriend had never done, never made me that type of priority. And I got that text message and I literally picked up the phone and called him, and I was like, I wanted to wait to say this to you in person, but I just can't hold it in anymore. I need to say it to you right now. I love you. And that was 2 weeks into our relationship, and yeah, I mean, that was it. That was my you are in love moment. I could hear it in the silence. I could feel it with the lights out. It was the most incredible moment to know that there was someone out there who made me a priority like that. And I felt for the first time like I really understood what Taylor meant when she wrote the song You're in Love. And it was one of the most incredible nights of my life, despite the fact that I was completely miserably sick. So during the 1989 era, when the whole Kim Kanye snake incident happened, I honestly was devastated. I was really into Twitter at the time, and when I saw the Taylor Swift is over party hashtag trending, like, my heart was broken. Which I want to come out on the record and say first thing that I never believed that Taylor would do anything like that. Honestly, the whole scenario didn't make any sense to me, and I couldn't understand why people were jumping on her so much. Like, I was like, honestly, this line is really offensive. And even in the original video where the phone call is edited, she sounds super uncomfortable. And I always sort of stood behind Taylor. And so when the Taylor Swift is over party thing happened, and then she didn't put any music out for 3 years, I honestly was terrified. Like, I went through a phase where I thought seriously maybe I would never get another new Taylor Swift song again. And for me, as a lifelong Swiftie, as someone who felt like they'd grown up with her, as someone who felt like her music had helped me get through some real difficult moments in my life, that was a terrifying prospect for me, the idea that Taylor might never release another album. But of course, eventually she did. Eventually she came back around and gave us Reputation, which immediately, as soon as Reputation came out, it became my number one most favorite Taylor Swift album, and I'll tell you why. For me, as much as I love Taylor and have always loved Taylor, I'm 7 years younger than her, and by this point, by the end of the 1989 era, I was feeling like the themes in Taylor's music were still a little too young for me. I felt like her music wasn't really starting to talk about mature themes. At this point, I'd been in a relationship for 3 years. which Taylor actually hadn't even been in a relationship that long yet, so I'll give her some slack on that. But I was starting to feel like, why doesn't she talk about more mature relationship themes? Why isn't she talking about more adult themes? And I really wanted to see some more maturity in her music because I felt like I was starting to have trouble relating to her because the themes in her music weren't mature enough. And then Reputation came out. And immediately when I heard the songs on Reputation, I was like, this is what I have been waiting for. She is adult, she is angry, she is sensual, and she's really grappling with some things for the first time on Reputation that she doesn't dive that deeply into on her other albums. And I also just love the sound of Reputation. Ever since it came out, I've wished every other album would sound like Reputation. And so it just impacted me in a whole new way. When that album came out, I was like, okay, this is grown up Taylor. And I was so ready for it. And when the album actually came out, that is also one of my core memories, is the album release for Reputation. So my boyfriend DJ, who I was living with at the time, he was going out of town, and he was going to be out of town for several days. And so my mom actually came over and stayed with me at my boyfriend's house. And once again, we went and picked up the CD at midnight from Target. And this time we brought it back home and we popped it in the surround sound speakers at home. And me and my mom, like, at this point, it was becoming a tradition. We sat and we listened to the album for the first time through together. And both of us just remember experiencing this moment of being like, wow, Taylor's really grown up and she's really starting to like take ownership of who she is. And that was just such an amazing thing to watch and to experience and get to have for the first time with my mom. And I think my favorite songs immediately off the album were I Did Something Bad and Don't Blame Me, of course. And then also Dress, because I have a really sensual relationship with my husband, who I was with at the time, who was my boyfriend at the time. And Dress was the first time I heard a Taylor Swift song that really expressed the sensuality that I felt with my partner. And made me really feel like I could have a Taylor song that gave the same sort of feelings that the partner in my relationship gave me. And another song from this album that was really, really important to me was This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things. And this album is important to me because it actually helped my mom leave her abusive husband. She was really on the edge at the time. She was trying to decide if she felt like she could leave that situation, if she should. And, this song, she started listening to it on a loop, and she told me that in the end it gave her the confidence really to be like, yeah, you know what? This is why we can't have nice things. This is why we can't keep doing this. And my mom finally got the confidence to leave her abusive husband, to move out, and ultimately to pursue a dream that she'd always wanted, which was to live in Europe. She had a friend who lived over in the country of Georgia, just around the Black Sea. And my mom decided to leave her husband and move across the world and go live in the country of Georgia for 2 years. And that experience was so liberating for her. And it really started with Reputation giving her that oomph to really express her anger and take ownership of it so that she could get herself out of that situation. Unfortunately, that meant that when the Reputation tour came around, my mom was halfway across the world and we did not get the chance to go together. And she was actually still living on the other side of the world when the Reputation Stadium tour became available on Netflix. But that did not stop us. Me and my mom actually got on a live stream on a video call together the night that the Reputation Stadium tour became available on Netflix, and we got on the live stream, we both pressed play at the same time, and we watched the Reputation Stadium tour together from across the world. And that just brings me back to the way that Taylor really repaired my relationship with my mom. Like, if you'd asked me when I was a teenager if I thought that I would have been doing something like that, I would have told you absolutely not. Like, I don't have that close relationship with my mom. But every new album that Taylor Swift has released since I turned 18 has brought me and my mom closer and closer together. And I can't imagine any other experience than having watched Reputation Stadium Tour for the first time with her virtually. Even though it was across the world, it was definitely one of the most meaningful experiences that I've had, especially surrounding Taylor Swift. And, all in all, Reputation for a long time has been my favorite album. I think right now, Tortured Poets is like right on the brink of beating it out as my favorite album. I'm holding out for Reputation Taylor's version before I officially declare that Tortured Poets is my favorite. But we will see. Also, just a little bit of an honorable mention off of Reputation. King of My Heart was my outro song for my wedding. So when I got married to my husband, DJ, we got married in a butterfly pavilion, which is like an artificial rainforest where they raise a bunch of butterflies. And as part of the ceremony, we got to, we had this like decorative cage. And at the end of the ceremony, we got to release a flock of butterflies that had just been born that day. And so the way that it worked at our wedding is we like said our vows and did all of our things. And then it started playing the first verse of King of My Heart as an instrumental. And then right as it hits the drop of the song where it's like, and all at once you are the one I have been waiting for, we opened this cage and this flock of beautiful fluttering butterflies came out, and it was one of the most magical moments of my entire life. Once again, thanks to Taylor Allison Swift. So going into the Lover era actually ended up being a really hard time for me. A lot of people think of Lover as a super romantic, happy, poppy album. I think because it's brightly colored and it's got some of that pop influence. It's got a lot more carefree romanticism on it, maybe than Reputation did. But at the same time, I also feel very strongly that Lover is Taylor's first album about being in a serious adult relationship. And because of that, it actually deals with some pretty serious, pretty heavy themes. And at the time that Lover came out, I was 4 or 5 years into my first really, really serious relationship. And I was also in college and I was really struggling, and I felt like I was delayed on my career. I wanted to be an actress, but I was still living in Colorado, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to get out of Colorado and get to California and pursue my dreams. And and I was also just dealing with some miscommunication with my partner. I felt like we weren't always on the same page. And so when Lover came out as an album, songs like The Archer and Afterglow and False God really triggered something in me and really made me start scrutinizing and overanalyzing all of the little difficult parts of my relationship with my partner. And really asking myself, was this working? And if it wasn't working, was it because of him, or was it because of me? Was it because I really didn't belong in a relationship because my career was my real focus, and so I was never gonna give all of that up to give myself fully to a relationship? And so about a week or two after Lover came out, my relationship went into full crisis. I had a complete existential meltdown, and I started asking myself should I be in a relationship at all, or is my relationship holding me back from reaching my life goals? And Lover really put me out for a little while, because I was listening to these songs, and all of my heroes died all alone, and who could ever leave me, but who could ever stay? These ideas hit me so deeply, and in Afterglow, when she talks about being the one who burned it down and how she didn't mean it, like, I felt that on such a deep personal level, and I started asking myself, am I burning this down because it's not what I really want? What I really want is to go pursue my career. And hearing those songs, going through those realizations, having words put to these complex adult relationship emotions that I was feeling for the first time, really, I think, opened up my mind and made me think about where my relationship was and where it was going. And even though that was really scary, ultimately it ended up being super necessary. And I went through this huge breakdown. I told my boyfriend that I didn't know if I should be in a relationship at all and that I needed some space. And I went away for a night and listened to Lover on a loop over and over and over again, and kept asking myself questions, and trying to figure out what I wanted. And ultimately, what needed to happen was that my relationship needed to be restructured. And me and my boyfriend talked about how he could help encourage me to do what I felt like I needed to be doing, and what I needed out of that relationship to become my best self. And ultimately, he and I ended up working as a team, and repairing our relationship and coming out stronger than ever. And now when I listen to Lover, sometimes it still makes me sad, but more so, I come back to those moments where I see that it is about real adult relationships. And it makes me realize that what Taylor's writing about there is when you love someone enough that you're willing to fight for it, even when it doesn't feel good. And not in a way that's fighting for something that's unhealthy, but that's fighting for something that's worth it, even when that thing isn't always what you want it to be. And I think that was a big part of helping me mature and helping me find equilibrium in my relationship, that eventually has caused it to become the most solid foundational thing in my life to this day. And then, of course, later on in the Lover era, Taylor released the Miss Americana documentary. And when this came out, I swear I've never had a piece of media resonate with me more. When I watch Miss Americana and she talks about the feelings that she has, particularly about just always wanting to be a good girl, I relate to that on such a deep personal level. And also, having been in entertainment my whole life, and her talking about the industry and the things that people say to her and the things people expect from her, I relate to all of that on such a deep level that for me, watching Miss Americana feels like a very, very parasocial experience. I would say probably that when that documentary came out is when I shifted from being a casual fan, or, just a fan of her music. I would say going from being a fan of her music and a little bit of the pop culture to having a full parasocial attachment to Taylor Swift started with the Miss Americana documentary, because that was the first time that I really watched a piece of media about her, and I was like, I see myself in her in every frame. And so that's really the moment for me when I feel like it went from not just being about the music, not just being about what her music did for me, but to being about how I feel connected to Taylor Swift as a person, as a professional, and as a role model for me, as to who I want to be as I continue to go forward into this entertainment industry. So, a little bit of a fun fact about me. My sixth sense is predicting when Taylor Swift is gonna drop an album with zero Easter eggs and zero context. So this has actually happened to me a couple of times. The first one was when she dropped the music video for Me. I was actually in the hospital at the time. I was super, super sick from an asthma attack. I was laid up in the hospital for like 8 days. And I remember being on a call with my mom, and we were just talking about people who should collaborate with Taylor Swift. We were like, this person, One Republic should do a duet with Taylor Swift, this person, that person should do something with Taylor Swift. And at the time, my second favorite artist in the world was Panic at the Disco. And so I was like, oh my god, it would be so cool if Taylor Swift did a collaboration with Panic at the Disco. But that would never happen because her style and Brendan Urie's style are just too different. That's never ever gonna happen. And then the next day, I woke up in the hospital and opened up Twitter, and there was a tweet from Taylor Swift where she said, coming out whenever, new music video with Brendan Urie. And I was like, oh my god. I literally just called it. I just yesterday or the day before had said Taylor Swift needs to do a collaboration with Panic at the Disco. And then out of nowhere, she announces that it already exists. Super crazy, weird sixth sense thing that I had. And then the same thing also happened when Folklore came out. So the day that Folklore was released, the surprise drop. So, this is, it came out at midnight, surprise drop. This is at 8 in the morning. And I hadn't been on socials yet, hadn't seen anything yet, had no idea. And I was literally driving in the car with my girlfriend at the time, and I was like, it's been a little while. I wonder when Taylor Swift will release an album, but I guess she just released one last year, so it'd probably be a little while. Who knows? But let's just look it up. Let's see what Taylor's doing. And I wonder, I bet you, maybe she'll release a new album soon. I opened up Google, typed in Taylor Swift new album, and it comes up and says, brand new Taylor Swift album, dropped today. I don't know how I know these things. I do. I know them. When Taylor is going to secret drop an album, the universe lets me know. So, if you're curious the next time she's going to secretly drop something, just, hit me up, okay? Okay. So, Folklore came out, and this was just a really unique experience for me because I felt like for the first time Taylor was reaching into parts of my life that she hadn't really touched before because, as far as I know, she's a straight woman who has traditional relationships, and I am a queer woman who has ethical, non-monogamous relationships, and so there were certain things and certain feelings that Taylor hadn't really addressed for me before, just because there were some differences in the way that we lived our life. And also, this is the first time I feel like that Taylor started to delve into some parts of life that weren't necessarily about friendships, relationships, or romance, but that were just about being human and experiencing being an adult human and how difficult that is for the first time. And so Folklore, I feel like, even more just expanded the ways in which Taylor's music shows representation for me. And actually, listening to Folklore was the first time that I personally heard queer and polyamorous representation in Taylor's music. And this wasn't with any influence from the outside. I wasn't seeing anything on social media. I wasn't even involved in the Swiftie fandom at this period in time. So it was just something I was experiencing for myself. But it started with the very first song on the album, which is The One. And in polyamory, there's this concept that we talk about where if you're practicing polyamory in a healthy way, then you never break up, you only transition. And so the idea about that is that, through healthy conversation and negotiation, relationships are sort of a tier. You've got friendships, you've got close friendships, you've got friends with benefits, and then you've got relationships, and then you've got intimate relationships. And in polyamory, the goal is that we are able to sort of navigate up and down through these tiers by using communication. And so that instead of breaking up, we just transition from a relationship status back to a friend status. And for me, I felt like the song The One exemplifies that whole concept. Wouldn't it have been fun if you were the one? But there's no hard feelings there. And so for me, as soon as I heard the song The One, I was like, this is a polyamorous breakup song. This is a polyamorous transition song. This is about being able to transition between partners and types of relationships healthily. And even if that's not what Taylor means it to be about, I found representation for myself for the first time in that way in her music. And it really meant a lot to me. Around the same time, actually, Cassandra Clare, who is an author, she's the author of the Shadowhunters Chronicles. She also released the Dark Artifices series around the same time, which includes a polyamorous throuple within her characters. And that was the first time that I had seen polyamory, genuine, healthy, well-written polyamory written into any type of fiction. And I was reading that book at the same time that Folklore came out, and I was ecstatic because I was seeing polyamorous representation in the media and in the artwork that I was consuming for the first time, and it really meant so much to me. And even though I know that that's not probably the way that Taylor means the song, it opened up something for me that was really, really meaningful in the moment. And also, I started finding queer themes in her music at that same time as a bisexual woman. When I listened to the song Betty for the very first time, there was like no question in my mind. Like, I didn't even think twice. I was like, all three characters in this song are girls. Period. Like, that's my brain. Like, it wasn't even about the fact that Taylor was the one singing and she is a girl. I toyed at one point in my brain with trying to think of, one of the other characters in the story being a boy. The more I thought of it and tried, I was like, all of the characters in this song are girls. The behavior is girl behavior. The whole seeing you across the gym, best friends, but you danced with him. I spent the summer next to her. All of that just gave me girl vibes. And I honestly, when I first heard Betty, my initial thought was, this is a song about a girl who is in love with her best friend, who gets offended when she sees her best friend get with a guy. That's what I thought Betty was about the first time, and it really made me feel like there was queer and bisexual representation in Taylor's music. And that was my initial response to that song without any outside influence. And even though she tells the story differently now, I still hear the song that way, and I still find that representation. And it gave me a song that makes me feel like I can relate to it in that queer way that's really important to me. And so it was just really unique that Folklore gave me that opportunity for the first time to see these alternative parts of my lifestyle in Taylor's music. And also, like I said, Folklore reached into the parts of life that don't have to do with relationships. She also just started dealing with the difficulty of adulting and self-esteem and maintaining your identity as an adult. And I think for me, the track that really resonated the most in that sense was This Is Me Trying. And that's because I really struggled in high school. I pushed myself really, really hard, and I got super burnt out. My anxiety was through the roof. I just couldn't handle it. And so I took a gap year after high school just to be able to catch back up and catch my breath. And then after that, I went into college and I started working really hard in college. I was in school to be a sign language interpreter, and that program was really, really intense. But I poured my heart and soul into that program for years and years and years. And then at the end of it, when I was in my internship, I was doing 40 hours of internship work a week. I was doing 30 hours of class a week, and then I was doing another 20 to 30 hours of schoolwork at home every week, and I was working a part-time job. So basically, I wasn't ever sleeping, and I just wasn't doing very well, and I started getting sick all the time. And then I ended up getting hospitalized for the entire last week of the semester. And I tried to get an extension on my internship so that I could finish out my degree. And when I went to the college to talk about it, they basically said, we don't think you've completed enough of your internship. So if you want to get your degree, you will have to wait an entire year and then start all 300 internship hours over from scratch. And that had to be some of the most devastating news that I have ever gotten in my life. College was really hard for me, and I did not want to keep at it at all. And so when they told me that, that was just like the rug had been ripped out from under me. And it left me with all of this academic trauma of this idea that I can, no matter how hard I work, I'm not going to get anything for it. I'm not going to get anything back in return. And so when I heard This Is Me Trying, that song cracked me open like an egg, I swear, where she says, I ran so far ahead of the curve became a sphere. I fell behind and ended up here. That's exactly how I feel. I was in honors and AP student all the way through school. I pushed myself and was in the top of my class all the way through college. And then somehow I slipped and tripped and fell completely behind. And to this day, I still deal with a lot of academic trauma that affects my work ethic on a daily basis. That's still something that I'm trying to overcome. And This Is Me Trying is really the first song that I've ever heard from any artist that put words to that feeling and gave me a tool to really be able to process all of that academic trauma that I experienced. Deep into the pandemic, and during the pandemic I was working as like an office manager for a moving company, and I started working from home during that time, doing all of my office work. And I was bored. I was in my head a lot. I was from home. I wasn't doing a lot of work because, people still had to move, but they were doing it themselves because they didn't want to bring in movers during the pandemic and stuff like that. So I really wasn't doing a lot of work, and I was bored. And so I picked up a little bit of a passion project at the time. I started writing a story with a friend of mine about two characters, one of whom is a super powerful woman who's in a position of power over men and has worked really hard to get there. And because of that, she really has a wall up romantically. She doesn't let anybody in because she's so used to having to prove that she's the best, and she can't show any weakness or affection around men. And then the guy is a 100% playboy, never had a relationship in his life, hit it and quit it, but the suavest guy you'll ever meet. And somehow the two of them hit it off. And then it's just sort of this like battle of wills between this super strong woman and this super playboy guy. And I had so much fun writing this story. These characters just sort of took off in my head. But then Fearless Taylor's version came out, and of course on there they have the vault track Mr. Perfectly Fine. And when I heard that song, I was like, this is the theme song for the story that I have been writing, because the main character of my story is Mr. Perfectly Fine. Like, that's his whole thing. And the girl in the story, it's that song expresses the way that he makes her feel by the end of it. And so when I heard that song for the first time, it just absolutely catapulted my inspiration for this story. And I ended up taking all of the writing that me and my friend had done together, the novelization, and converting it into a web series. And I would just listen to Mr. Perfectly Fine like on a loop every day, and I would write and write and write and write. And I have now written a full 10 episode web series with these characters. And my dream is that if I ever get to produce this series, that Taylor will let me use Mr. Perfectly Fine as the theme song for the show, because it fits so perfectly. And when that song came out, it just gave me the inspiration that I needed to completely run with that idea. And now that project is my brainchild. It is my baby, and I am saving it to hopefully one day produce. And I will continue to keep my fingers crossed that if I ever get that opportunity, Taylor will like the project and she will let me use that song, because to me, there's no song that fits the story better than Mr. Perfectly Fine. Unfortunately, just as much as the pandemic brought me inspiration and helped me create this incredibly beautiful piece of artwork, I also lost something really special and dear to me during the pandemic as well. My grandfather passed away during the COVID pandemic very suddenly, and that hit me really, really hard. And, it was sort of out of nowhere, and I didn't know what to expect. It's actually sort of interesting because 2 days before my grandfather died, I was preparing to move out to California to pursue my dreams, and I had a box of things that we weren't going to take to move across the country, and so I was going to give them to my grandparents. And I had called my grandfather to let him know that I was coming over to drop the box off, and he told me just to leave it on the front porch because him and my grandmother had COVID. And I didn't think much of anything of it at the time, but I was just like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just drop it off on the porch and I'll see you another time. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. And my grandfather's a really quiet guy. He's really sweet, but he wasn't always the most affectionate person. So we didn't always say I love you when we got off the phone, but just that day, something came over me. And right before he hung up the phone, I said, hey, Grandpa, I love you. And he said back to me, I love you too, kiddo. And those were the last words that my grandfather ever said to me. And then he passed away on 1/11/2021, which just so happens to be exactly 1 month and 1 year after the album Evermore was released. And I honestly don't think I could have gotten through that time without the song Marjorie. Honestly, from the time the song came out, I knew that that would be the song that I would one day sing at my grandmother's funeral, because it makes me think so deeply of how important my grandparents have been to me in my life and everything that they've given me. And in that song, when she says, I should have kept every grocery store receipt because every scrap of you would be taken from me. To me, sometimes I feel like that last phone call with my grandfather is my grocery store receipt. You know, that's my last memory of him. That's the last scrap of him that he gave to me, that I will get to carry with me forever. And every time I listen to that song and I hear that song, I think of him, and I think of his spirit watching over me, and the idea that even though he won't be here in person to see all of the accomplishments that are in the future of my career, I know that he's always watching. And that's something that is really important that Evermore gave me, is a way to hold on to that memory. So actually, that happening, my grandfather passing away, accelerated things in my life a little bit. I had actually gotten engaged the fall before that, and my husband and I were planning on having a long engagement and getting married after we had made the move across the country to California. But when my grandfather passed away, I just sort of felt off in my spirit. And my grandma was sort of my mother figure growing up, because I was raised by a single dad and my mom wasn't in a very secure household. And so my grandma's the one that stepped in and really raised me as a mother. And so I found myself, after my grandfather passed away, really thinking, I don't want to get married without my grandmother there. And I wasn't sure how much longer she would live, and I wasn't sure if she would travel across the country to see me get married, and all of these things. So I ended up changing my plans, and my husband and I got married on 2/22/22, because 2 is my lucky number. It was crazy. We planned the wedding in 5 weeks. It turned around, had the most amazing ceremony in the world. And then just a couple months after that, we moved across the country to California. And from that point on, my life started to change completely. And then, in the last year, since Midnights came out, since the Eras tour has started, all of this craziness, I feel like my life has changed just even more. Things have gotten so crazy. And Taylor Swift has become a bigger part of my life than she ever was before since I moved to California. I think a big part of that is the fact that I see her as a role model for my career, and I'm finally out here in the city of my dreams, pursuing the career that I've always wanted. And I turn to Taylor every day for reinforcement and affirmation on that journey. And so over the last year, I have just found a whole new meaning, even more, by becoming more deeply involved in the Swiftie community. So when we come back for the second part of our pilot, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the last year with the Midnights album, the Eras tour, all the way up through the Super Bowl, up to the Tortured Poets department, and really how the last year has taken a lifelong fandom that was built from all of these core memories and turned it into a religion, practically. And so I think we're going to have a lot of fun next week, really talking about just how the Eras tour has managed to take Taylor from just somebody who people love to the most popular person in the world, and what that means for all of the Swifties who have been on this journey with her along the entire way. I hope you guys have enjoyed my story, learning a little bit about my Swiftie journey and what Taylor means to me. This has been such a great experience to get to finally share this Swiftie journey with you on the Manuscript podcast. And as Taylor has told us, every now and again, she may reread the manuscript, but the story isn't hers anymore. It's ours. Thank you all so much for sticking around for me to share my Swiftie journey with you. Make sure to check out part 2 of our pilot, which will be about Midnights, the Eras tour, and the supercharging of Swiftiedom over the last year. And also make sure to subscribe to hear more unique life stories as told by the invisible strings that Taylor Swift weaves through our lives. Every week, or every 2 weeks rather, we will be sharing a different Swiftie journey from a different guest on the podcast. And if you are interested in being one of our guests and sharing your own Swiftie journey, you can find our submission page to submit your personal manuscript on our Linktree, which is linktree.com/TS manuscript pod. Again, that's linktree.com TS as in Taylor Swift, TS manuscript And the very first link on there will be the link to submit your personal Swiftie story to come be a guest on our podcast. So if that's something you're interested in, please go and fill out an application. We will be having new episodes available hopefully every 2 weeks. Thank you all so much for listening. And always remember, make the friendship bracelets. Take the moment and taste it. You have no reason to be afraid. Also, you can follow us on social media on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at TS Manuscript Pod. Again, on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, it's the same handle as our link tree. That is TS Manuscript Pod. Follow us to get all of the latest details and hear when all our new episodes come out.
The story